All right, I'm back here on Sunday again. This is a standalone video. The last video I did in the Giorgiani series today, part 8 of that series, inspired me to make a standalone video follow-up addressing again the Eastern and Western Christian debate on essence energies and Actus Purus. Actus Purus being the Latin phrase for pure act. That idea comes out of the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, who purloined it from Aristotle. It's the idea that God's potentialities are fully actualized, so they don't make a distinction between meaning the West. The Roman Catholic Church does not make a distinction between what God is and his activities, i.e. what God is and what he does. And the Eastern Orthodox contention is that that would mean God is not free because he's forced to create the world, for example. So I want to put my 2 cents in here from a non-dual perspective on that specific question. I'm not going to repeat most of what I said in that part 8 video to the Giorgiani series. I want to get into some newer stuff, but I will repeat one thing I said in that last video, which is that I pointed out that in a non-dual framework, there is still a distinction between God and the world, even though the world is an extension of God's divine being, and that it is analogous to the Christian view that in the doctrine of the Trinity, the Father eternally causes the Son and Holy Spirit. So all three are divine because they are all three eternal, but nevertheless, they're not equal in terms of causation because it's the Father that causes the Son and the Holy Spirit. And so that's how I'm explaining non-duality here, so to help kind of Christians understand, wrap their mind around non-dualism. From my perspective, I would use that and apply it to my understanding of creation itself, and I would say that God eternally caused the world or the universe. So there isn't a co-equality, as they would say that there is, between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We would say you cannot have co-equality if you can have co-eternality, but you can't have co-equality where causation is a factor. The minute you espouse causation, you're saying that there is a primacy there. Even if you want to deny that the nature of that causation is temporal, the minute you espouse causation, you are espousing in some sense the primacy of the cause over that which is caused. You have to. Otherwise, the notion of causation is meaningless. And there's no point in espousing it if it doesn't have any real meaning. But I just wanted to address this specific point that, let me just say, so my point there is just to say, that you can have God eternally causing the world without saying that God and the world are the same thing. They are both divine, But there's no 1-1 correlation. There's no reductionism here. Because there is that distinction of, God the Creator and the effects of His causing. Now, as to the question, does God have free will? Does God have freedom if He had to create? Because on my view, there was no beginning and there is no end to creation. So it is an innate aspect of what it is to be God, which is to manifest things. Well, what I would say is that God has to create in the same way that an artist has to produce art, because it is innate to the artist. The artist has a certain love for beauty and the creation of beauty. It is a passion for the artist. And so, far from God's eternal causation of the world indicating that He is in any way coerced into doing that, I would say that on the contrary, it is a sign that God is simply doing what He loves. And it is such an innate part of Him that it cannot be separated from Him. Another thing is that since the world is not a separate thing from God, as it is in the Christian doctrine of creation ex nihilo, God is not creating something outside of Himself. So everything is internal. There could not be, in any sense, anything outside of God that is forcing Him or coercing Him to do what He's doing, because it's all internal. And therefore, in that sense, there's no distinction between God's action and the effects of His action, between God's activity and the things that He brings into existence as a result of that activity. So He's co-equal with His creation, but He is nonetheless the cause or the creator, and that's the difference. Then there's this other issue. If you're a non-dualist and you don't believe there's an end to God's creation, if there's no terminus to that process, then it's not possible for God's potentiality, as the Eastern Orthodox would object to the Western Catholic view. It wouldn't be possible for God's potentialities, which are infinite, to be fully realized in the first place, since they can never be fully realized, because they're continually being brought into manifestation without end. Since there's no end, there's no completion to the process of realization. There's no completion to the process of bringing the potential into actuality. So the problem with a pure Actus Purus view is not that creation is eternal. The problem is that it levels God and creation to such an extent that there's not even an eternal distinction between them, and thus you're left with a radical monism. And therefore, if you have a radical monism, you cannot even account for how anything could be brought into manifestation to begin with. That's the problem with Actus Purus. It's not that God is creating from all eternity. So it's a category. They're confusing categories. It's a confusion of categories. It's completely irrelevant whether God has been creating from all eternity. It has nothing to do with the issue. Another way you can demonstrate or illustrate that eternal creation is not a violation of God's freedom is that there are an infinite number of sequences of events. There's an infinite number of combinations whereby God could have chosen, from among which God could have chosen to how do I want to word that? There's an infinite number of sequences of events that God could have chosen to activate, but he only chose the one that we are experiencing. And so there's that freedom. He could have chosen to order things differently than he did, but he didn't. So that's what I would say is that, number one, God's potentialities are cannot ever be fully actualized in reality because of the fact that there's no terminus. So the objection to Actus Purus on those grounds is totally false. And then the other thing is that he could have brought everything we experience about in a very different way, and he chose not to do that. So he's still free in terms of how he orders everything that he brought into existence.